All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Virginia chapter of the Reading League. You are in for a treat tonight. We have a session for you, explicit instruction for intensifying, decoding, and encoding instruction. This session is designed specifically to support you, our Virginia educators, as we implement the Virginia Literacy Act, and translate research grounded in the science of reading into evidence-based instructional practices across all of our classrooms. So we will be discussing instructional routines that can be used in your classrooms, regardless of the approved curriculum that you have selected. These are curriculum agnostic instructional routines that are going to increase the explicitness of literacy instruction in order to support all students as they learn to read. So by the end of this session, we hope that you all as participants are able to understand the how and the why of using these instructional routines to enhance your reading instruction in the areas of decoding and encoding. And I'll take just a minute to introduce you to our Virginia board. We have many of our members here with us tonight. So just a little shout out to our board members. We appreciate each and every one of you as you make this programming possible. We have our past president, Susan Campbell, who's coming to us from Culpeper. I have the privilege of this year being our president, and my name is Jennifer Sassano. I'm coming to you from Loudoun County. We have our vice president that is soon to be announced. We have our secretary, Angelique Wincoop, also representing Culpeper, and our treasurer is on the line with us, Jennifer McCrae from Rockingham. We have our fabulous events chair that organized this evening for us, Erin Saxton from Norfolk. Our wonderful publicity chair, Kelsey, who did such a great job getting all this information out to you, and she's also coming to us from Culpeper. Membership, Jacqueline Alston from Brunswick is going to be talking to you later this evening on how you also can get involved with our chapter. And then our governance, Lauren Ziegler from Hanover, board members, Kim Boston Brown, Richmond, Tisha Hayes from Charlottesville, and our advisor to the board, Emily Solari from Charlottesville. So thank you to each and every one of our board members. Just to give you a little bit of an introduction or a reintroduction to who we are, this is our vision at the Reading League of Virginia. Every educator will be prepared to implement evidence-based practices to meet the diverse profiles of all students with the goal of becoming skilled, lifelong readers. It's really our why for being with you and our mission, educating every administrator, teacher, and parent to the research and evidence that has emerged from the science of reading. Our goal is truly to bring together all stakeholders with that shared mission and shared values around reading success, and that's going to be tonight's focus. So I have really the pleasure of introducing you tonight to Jess Surles, coming to us from the National Center on Improving Literacy. Jess is a research scientist at Boston University Wheelock College of Education and Human Development. Jess partners with literacy experts and university researchers to integrate current research and professional learning for classroom practitioners, leadership, and educational agencies. Her recent work includes curriculum development, supporting educators with the implementation of evidence-based literacy practices, and guiding elementary school leaders in building and sustaining an effective school-wide reading system. So before joining the faculty at BU, Jess worked as a school district coach, Title I reading specialist, and instructor for multilingual learners, and a classroom teacher. So we are really privileged to have Jess here with us tonight, and I'm going to turn it over to her.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. So good to be here with you all this evening. Thanks so much for joining. And those of you that are watching the recording later, thanks for taking time out of your schedule to catch up on all the Reading League had to offer in this session. So we'll go ahead and jump in. It is going to be lots of information, but hopefully in fun and engaging ways, and kind of have you be the students in several of the examples. So if you have the capacity bandwidth wise and can turn your cameras on, would love to see you as we're working through things. And if not, that's okay. You can participate with your camera off, but just so you can kind of get a feel for the instruction from a student perspective as we go through examples today. So looking at just the slide deck, explicit instruction for intensifying, decoding, and encoding instruction. And it is brought to you kind of from the National Center on Improving Literacy for this session, as Jennifer mentioned in the intro. And then moving into our mission for the National Center is to increase access and use of evidence-based approaches to screen, identify, and teach students with literacy-related disabilities, including dyslexia. And then we have our outcome for kind of your learning tonight and our time together is to increase your knowledge and ability to use instructional routines for decoding and encoding. So we'll spend some time talking about each of those tonight. Really quickly for the agenda, we'll look at some theoretical frameworks just to kind of level set what we know about reading and teaching reading and what the research and science says about how students learn to read. We'll look at instruction, the what, the how, and the who. We'll look at application of those principles, and then we'll talk a little bit briefly about intensification, and I'll share a resource with you that we have through the National Center to support intensification practices. There'll be a little icon on some of this slides this evening, and it's just a resource highlighting links that I'll drop in the chat box. So as we go through our time together today, I will drop in little links in the chat box and you can download and access materials from there as well. So let's jump in. What is the science of reading? The science of reading is research derived from lots of fields or disciplines of science, and it includes science from cognitive psychology, communication sciences, developmental psychology, education, implementation science, linguistics, neuroscience, school psychology. So lots of fields. And when we're talking about the science of reading, are kind of integrated into that body of research. What the science of reading is not is any just specific program, intervention, or product you can buy. It's not a one size fits all kind of skill and drill phonics based curriculum that takes out other key components of reading instruction. And it's not a body of knowledge that's complete or finished. We are constantly learning, constantly evolving in all of those fields listed above. So the science, though we know these kind of staple pieces of it, we're also adding to that body of research through continued studies in all of those fields and disciplines. So I'll drop a link in the chat now to this Improving Literacy brief in case you're interested in accessing it through Improving Literacy. And then we'll take a look at some of the National Reading Panel information. So kind of the baseline for what we're going to talk about tonight is seminal work that was done by the National Reading Panel. They reviewed and synthesized decades of existing research that really resulted in a report that recognized 5 big ideas or 5 components of reading instruction, including phonemic awareness, which is just the awareness of sounds and speech, phonics, which is connecting letter sound relationships and being able to decode words using those letter sound relationships, fluency, so reading phrases, words, and sentences with enough speed and expression that those decoding skills almost seem automatic. Students can easily focus their attention then on understanding of the words in the text. It's kind of the bridge to comprehension. Thinking about vocabulary, knowing what words mean, how to say them, how to use them correctly. And a lot of that vocabulary we learn through reading or explicit vocabulary instruction and oral language development. And then at the bottom, and this is an infographic also available through NCIL, is reading comprehension. So all of these skills kind of leaning on one another and leading to reading comprehension, which is really the end game. Are we able to read and understand what we're reading to gain knowledge and an understanding of the world around us? So as we're reading, understanding background knowledge and sentence structures and text structures, being able to monitor our understanding and connect ideas from the text that we're reading. So looking at all of those pieces kind of working together, and all of that kind of was emerged from this national reading panel work. The next thing we'll look at is from it's a structured literacy approach from International Dyslexia Association, or IDA for short. And this is an infographic really looking at how all of these kind of pieces fit together. So at the bottom is you have the science of reading, the what, which is that body of research that we're continually learning from. And then you have the what, which is kind of the content. Those 5 big ideas are included in that what. And then the right-hand side is the how. So what is our kind of pedagogy? What's the way that we're going to get all of this information to students so they're able to read and comprehend and write about what they're reading? So that how is on that left-hand side. And I'll drop this graphic in the chat as well that does go over that structured literacy approach in case that's something you would like to access. Kind of moving into more of the what is the IES practice guide. And the Institute of Educational Sciences, that's IES, has multiple practice guides. They're all phenomenal resources. If you're not familiar with them, I highly recommend diving into them. You can just do a Google search for IES practice guides, and it will take you to a landing page for multiple practice guides that are available through IES. The one that we're going to really kind of ground the work in for this session is the foundational skills to support reading with understanding in grades kinder through 3rd grade. And then we're going to focus really this session on 2 through 4 in this practice guide and looking at phonological awareness and phonemic awareness, the segments of speech and how those speech sounds are connected to sounds, which is recommendation number 3, decoding words and analyzing word parts. And then ensuring that students are reading connected text every day to build accuracy, fluency, and comprehension. On the right-hand side of this slide, you can see kind of this like green bar continuum. And that's just showing that these skills kind of are integrated into curriculum at kind of various touch points across grades K through 3. So for example, for recommendation 1, that's a pretty important recommendation that spans K3. Whereas if we look at 2, thinking about those awareness of sounds and speech, we really start that in kindergarten, and it kind of gradually fades out and more focus goes on to recommendation 3 and 4 as you're kind of building knowledge across those grade level bands for K3. So as we're kind of talking through content today, keeping that in mind as we're looking at the lesson, we'll use a kindergarten lesson in our example, but knowing that some of those components of the lesson and the way that we would, maybe the content we're teaching within those lessons, the routines might stay the same. What content is being introduced may vary a little bit based on grade. So then looking at the next piece here, recommendation 2 is developing awareness of the segments of sound and speech. And then there's 3 action steps that go with that recommendation. All of this can be found in that practice guide. So looking at teaching students to recognize sounds, using word building activities to kind of ground those sounds and make those letter sound connections. Recommendation 3 is the next one, and it's really around teaching children to decode words, analyze word parts. You can go ahead and hit the next slide, and write and recognize words. And there are 6 action steps in the practice guide for this particular recommendation, and they kind of range from teaching students to blend letter sounds, which we'll look at some activities that do that in just a few minutes, thinking about instructing students on common sound spelling patterns that they're learning, teaching them to recognize common word parts and read regular and irregular words with a rate of automaticity, and then introducing some non-decodable words that are more complex, but really contribute to the comprehension and the meaning of the text. And then recommendation 4 is ensuring that each student reads connected text every day to support their accuracy, fluency, and comprehension. And then there are 3 action steps in the practice guide that correspond with that recommendation. As students are reading orally, we're modeling strategies, we're providing feedback, they're doing some self-monitoring of what they're reading to make sure they're understanding and doing some self-correcting of word reading errors. And then providing lots of oral language practice, especially as students are learning to read in K and 1. We still are embedding that oral language practice to really help them develop that fluent and accurate reading with expression as they're learning to read in those early grades. To the next slide here is looking at the foundational skills and kind of overlaying that with that structured literacy approach that we looked at from IDA, or the International Dyslexia Association. And this is going to kind of feed into that how piece. So we're going to look at how we can take the content from the practice guide and how do we actually get that to students so they can learn all of those pieces that really play into becoming a fluent reader who can comprehend the texts that they're reading. So looking at this kind of integration on the here, we're going to look at explicit instruction just to kind of level set what we mean when we talk about explicit instruction as one of those how components. And in this video, it's really short, but you'll hear a teacher explanation, which is a part of explicit instruction, which sets the learning target or the learning objective. You'll see a teacher model, lots of models for students as we're teaching with explicit instruction to really make it clear what we're expecting of students and what we're asking of them. Practice opportunities, and I'll use quite a bit this evening, a signal, and I'll kind of give you a signal response for when I want you to all correlate to respond. So all students are practicing. You'll see how we kind of weave in some continuous judicious review, thinking about pacing and immediate corrective feedback to students as we go through kind of our lesson examples this evening, and then checking in for understanding. So we'll go ahead and play the video, and I just want you kind of thinking about where do you see these pieces? It'll label them at the bottom of the video. But just thinking about how that makes our instruction explicit for students.
Ready? We're going to practice saying sounds. When I point to the sound, say the sound in your head. When I tap under the sound, you will say the sound out loud. My turn. Sound. I. Sound. E. Your turn. Sound. I. Sound. E. Oh, wait for the tap. Sound. E. Sound. I. Sound. I. So, my turn, sound. I. Your turn, sound. I. Yeah, ready, sound. E. Sound. I. Sound. I. Sound. E. Sound. Oh, first sound. E. Second sound. E. Third sound. I. Nice. Sound. I. Sound. E. My turn. Sound. I. Your turn. Sound. I. Wait for my tap. Sound. I. First sound. E. Second sound. E. Third sound. Look at the ice cream card. Third sound. I. There you go. Nice. Sound. I. Sound. Ice cream card. Look at it. Sound. I. There we go. First sound or short sound. Ah. Long sound. A. Sound. E. Sound. I. Sound. Sound. I. Sound. I. First sound. E. Wait for that tap. First sound. E. Second sound. E. Third sound. I. Sound. I. Nice job. Let's try some individual turns. I will point next to the sound. I will call one student. Only that student says the sound out loud. Sound. Armando. I. Beautiful. Sound. Eric. I. Sound. Think about it. Sound. Michaela. I. Nice job, guys. Excellent.
All right, so thinking about those components of explicit instruction as we go through our lesson example this evening, just thinking about where are those places as you're overlaying into your own core program, knowing a lot of you are implementing various core programs across the state. And if we have folks that are joining from other states, having that different core program in your state as well, how can we overlay these explicit components through these instructional routines to really boost the engagement and participation and practice opportunities for all students? I always think about like whoever's doing the teaching or whoever's doing the talking is often doing the learning. So how can we get students talking and interacting with the content that we're teaching through that explicit instruction? How can we get them all responding and all getting opportunities to practice throughout the lesson? So we'll go ahead and look at just kind of setting the tone for this evening session. thinking about those recommendations from the practice guide, and then shifting that into putting the theory and the research into practice. So how do we do that? How do we put all that stuff from the practice guide into what we're delivering in our classrooms? And this lesson plan is adapted from Archer and Hughes, Anita Archer and Charles Hughes. And we're going to insert kind of a basic phonics lesson into the template and demonstrate kind of how that what from the practice guide comes into that how of structured literacy. So thinking about the context of the lesson plan, go ahead and hit the next slide. We're going to look at a structured literacy approach for a kindergarten phonemic awareness lesson and phonics lesson. So you'll see kind of this might pop up in around the second quarter of kindergarten within the scope and sequence of your core program, what letter sounds have been taught already, what vowels and consonants students have learned, what are the irregular words that have maybe been previously taught, and then kind of knowing the context that we would have set routines up for students for unison core responses and partner responses. And for this evening, I'll hold my hand up, and then when I drop, that would kind of signal for your student response. So as we go through material to this evening together, you'll see me using that signal, really getting all of you engaged in the practice opportunities as we're going through the time together today. And then thinking about your lesson plan logistics, just kind of a couple of cueing pieces here in your lesson. You're going to see a T bolded, and that's in looking at that teacher talk or that teacher explanation, that learning objective, and really thinking about keeping it clear and concise when we're giving our instructions to allow more time for students to practice. And there'll be some icons on screens. You'll see maybe one of those 4 teachers for that teacher talk. And then there'll be some clipboards integrated throughout the slides that have just tips for organizing and delivering instruction as we go through this lesson template here. Looking at things to keep in mind, we're on kind of a tight timeline for a lesson. So this is just really snapshots. This is not intended to be like an entire lesson, but really thinking about what are some of these instructional routines and protocols that you could overlay and use within your core program content, lifting the content out, those phonics patterns that you're teaching in your core program, and kind of using these routines as a springboard to teach that content. We'll talk a little bit about irregular words toward the end of the time together, really thinking about teachers using data to guide decisions and really knowing your students. So what are your students mastering? What have they not yet mastered? And those things they haven't yet mastered, incorporating those to really provide some judicious review and mastery of that content. So looking at your lesson template, the first piece is the cue, where we're going to tell students kind of that learning objective and activating any prior knowledge. So in this particular lesson, we're going to use some cards and some grapheme review pieces here. So this first activity is practicing letter sounds for words we've studied. And your little tip here is potentially putting this on a slide deck if you're presenting it whole group. It's way easier to organize, and you don't have to worry about like pulling cards and finding cards and dropping cards as you're presenting. It's happened to all of us at some point, I'm sure. And you drop your pile and all your cards are everywhere, and then you've got to organize them. So just having them in a slide deck can be really helpful. And then you'll see the vowels and consonants are color-coded in this activity. So for this activating prior knowledge activity, I will drop my hand when it's time for you to respond, and then you can keep yourself muted, but just go ahead and practice being as if you were a student. You'll see me kind of hold my hand up, give you some think time, and when I drop it, that would be all of my students responding at the same time. So again, thinking about that explicit instruction, all students are practicing. So for this one, I will say, I'll ask you the letter name, give you some think time, and drop my hand for all of us to say M. And then I'll prompt you for sound, give you some think time, drop my hand and have you say, So let's try this one together. Ready? Everyone, what is this letter's name? What sound? Yeah, let's try a few more like that. Everyone, letter name. That's right. C, letter sound. Yes, next one. Let's look at it. Everyone think about letter name. And the sound. Ah, if students missed that, I could say, oh, my turn. That letter sound is ah. Everyone, what letter sound? We could practice a couple more and then come back to ah for some more practice. All right, everyone, letter name. G, yes, letter sound. G, nice work. Letter name. H and letter sound. That's right. That one's been tricky and we got that one this time. So giving them that corrective feedback. After we've kind of warmed our brains up with the letter sounds, now we can practice writing those letter sounds. We'll have one example in this one, but you could do it for multiple letter sounds. I could have students write 3 or 4 letter sounds to activate that prior knowledge. But again, your teacher talk here. Let's write letter sounds, listen to the sounds, repeat it and think about the letter that spells the sound, and then we'll write the letter when we say the sound. The sound is what sound, everyone? Yes, that's right. Write the letter that spells the sound And then students, I love lined paper for this activity. So in your thinking about your classroom and your classroom setup, and that next slide, giving you a couple of examples of what that letter or kind of what your lined paper might look like. So go ahead and hit the next slide here. And having, you could have lined whiteboards and thinking about thin markers with just mechanics of writing and pencil grip and that kind of thing. The thin expo markers work a lot better than the thick ones as students are really learning those fine motor skills, especially in kindergarten. And then your lined paper writing journal with those primary lines, giving those lines, especially in K1, to help with that kindergarten kind of letter formation piece. And then from a teacher's perspective, if students are using lined paper, I'm using lined paper as the instructor too, so I can talk through letter formation with students. So really thinking about as students are writing those letters, modeling that handwriting, and then providing feedback along their handwriting too on those lined paper sources. Blending phonemes is the next activity. So thinking about blending sounds to read words. Again, these would be sounds that students have learned already. There wouldn't be any new sounds as I'm activating prior knowledge. And then we're going to do something called chaining, where I'm going to change one letter and have you say the sound for each letter and blend those letters to read the word. So we'll go ahead and look at the first letter together. And we're going to have the first one is ham. And if I was the teacher, I would be pointing to the H, the A, and the M and have students continuously blend those sounds. So I'd have blend, ham, and then I would slide my finger for students to read the word ham. So let's try this one together. If I was pointing to the H and swooping over, let's blend that together. Ready? Word, ham. And then we could change it. We could change that first letter and make it a different letter. So go ahead and click and we'll change that letter. And now let's blend. Ready? As I'm pointing across, Sam, Sam. And students could read the word. Then I can change one more letter. I've changed that last letter. So our last sound's going to change. And then I'll have students blend it. Sad, word, sad. And I could keep doing that with several examples using my cueing system. So students are really going through that signaling process and all students are saying the sounds, all students are blending those sounds to read the words. If students have practiced word list or they've practiced a decodable text, that's another opportunity for activating prior knowledge. So they could practice reading from their word list or practice reading some of their decodable texts that they've been able to read with accuracy and fluency to kind of get their brains going and activating around the letter sounds they've learned so far in your curriculum. Now what we're going to look at is the preview and the introducing of new concepts. So thinking about what students already know and what they're going to learn today. And then again, there's that word explicit. So thinking about that direct, explicit teaching. So that teaching of the model, step-by-step instructions, connecting students to what they've known since we've activated that prior knowledge and providing some of that corrective feedback here for students. So looking at your introducing of the new concept, we have, we're going to listen for the first sound and words, listen to the sentences, and I would read the sentences to students. Tom took turkey. 2 tiny turtles told tales. What is the first sound you hear in each word, everyone? That's right. T. Yeah, we hear t. Say it with me, everyone. T. Say it on your own. T. Yeah, feel your tongue tapping behind your teeth for that t sound. And then I can go to the next one and I can think about, let's showing you a picture of this and giving you some kind of picture cues to associate with this letter sound. So we have listen and say the words that begin with the t sound. I'm going to show you one picture at a time. We will name the picture when I give you the signal and I will say 3, 2, 1, show me. You're going to put me a thumbs up if the t is the first sound and you're going to give me a thumbs down if t is not the first sound. So here we go. Let's look at our thumbs up and thumbs down. Let's look at our first picture. Here we go. The first picture is a picture of a tiger. Tiger. Wait until the signal. Tiger. 3, 2, 1, show me. Yeah, tiger starts with t. Nice job. Then I could animate in the turtle, the picture of the turtle. Think about turtle. What's the word, everyone? Yeah, does turtle start with t? 3, 2, 1, show me. And then I can see at chest level. Yep, all of us think that turtle starts with t. Then I can go to the next picture, have the next picture animate in. Book, what's the word, everyone? Book. Yep, think about it. Does book start with t? 3, 2, 1, show me. And then everybody shows at the same time, right? So I have all of my students thinking, I've given you some think time, and all of us are responding at the same time. That gives me as a teacher a really good gauge at, did I have all thumbs down on that one, or were there some thumbs up and some thumbs down? And then I can give some corrective feedback if we had some, and we could talk about, oh, for book, does your tongue go to the top of your mouth for book, right? And giving some of that corrective feedback. I could do the same for toe, have that picture animate in, for house, and for tomato, with that really clear signaling procedure. Again, getting all students a chance to respond on that signal. Looking at this next piece, we talked a little bit about articulation on the last slide, but articulation is important, and knowledge and articulation does sometimes help with that auditory discrepancy, especially for our students who are learning English. So thinking about this slide here, thinking about using the tips, tongue, and teeth, and having the teacher tell the students that, and watch how I say t. You could use mirrors. You could use picture cues of students and how students' mouth formation is. Kidlips is a great resource for this, for where students are kind of articulating, the place of articulation in students' mouths, and really helping them kind of articulate that sound and walking them through that process, giving them support when needed there. Then your next slide here is looking at introducing your new concept. So still thinking about that I do, looking at these words, top, 10, and tag. I'll read them. Top, 10, tag. What sound do you hear at the beginning of all these words, everyone? That's right. We hear t at the beginning of all these words. Our tongue is at the tip of the back of our teeth. T spells the sound t at the beginning of these words. What letter, everyone? T. Yes. So we're going to learn about the new letter T today. Looking at your next piece here, introducing the new concept, we could show students where that T is in the alphabet in relation to other letters they've learned in the alphabet, and then giving them that picture cue. So when we think about T, we're going to think about turtle, and this is one of those recommendations from the practice guide, is anchoring the letter and the letter sound with a picture cue for students to respond to. Another great scaffold for all students, but especially your multilingual learners, giving that picture cue for students to think about and associate with that new letter sound that they're learning. Then you have writing. So anything that we're teaching with reading, we're teaching in writing. So thinking about letter formation practice with students, handwriting, explicit instruction should be emphasized with your handwriting piece too. How are letters formed? And that letter formation and fluency in letter formation impacts writing words, sentences, and even paragraphs. The more fluent students are with writing letters, the more fluent they're going to be with writing sentences and paragraphs. So giving them some explicit instruction with that letter formation. Again, I can't stress enough the importance of lined paper for this, especially as students are learning how to write letters, and that we're modeling as teachers using lined paper too. So students have that reference point. And then really thinking about our writing instruction being direct and explicit, modeling, practicing. Students can trace letters. Often that is a helpful way for them to learn how to really form those letters within those lines on their paper. Then we move into your guided practice, or your we do, walking through models and practice opportunities for students. Again, thinking about those multiple opportunities for students to practice. So we'll look at a few ways to do that here. Again, this is just a few examples. It is not all inclusive, but it is pulling in some of those strategies from the practice guide. So we'll go ahead and look at one activity, which is really looking at manipulation and blending using letter cards. For this particular activity, you would have letter cards that students are able to access, or you could have letter tiles or magnetic letters, whatever the case may be. And then just going through the beginning, what letter, what sound all these letters make. So I would point to each one that I have kind of in my display, and I would have students on my signal as I'm pointing. What sound, everyone? T, sound, sound, ah, and kind of walking ourselves through those letters to make sure we know those letter sounds. And if there's an error, I'm going to correct it right before we start our activity. Make sure we understand those letter sounds before we start going into a more complex task of building out words. That's harder. So we need to make sure we know those letter sounds before we can build those words. And then we can go into this activity. So the first activity, or the first word, is top. So it would have students spell the word top. So they're pulling down their letters of their top, and then have them say the sounds, read the word top. And then I'm going to say, ooh, let's switch out the ah for the ah. And students have to go across their page, and they've got to find their tile or their little magnetic letter and switch out their ah for their ah. And then I'm going to give them some think time. Everyone, what word? Think about those sounds. What word, everyone? Tap. Yeah, top became tap. All right, now switch out your ah for your I. And I'm going to give some time for students to switch out their ah for their I, provide some corrective feedback as I'm rotating around. Once they have it, I can model it for them and say, oh, let's think about that word. Say the sounds. What word, everyone? Tip. Yeah, that word is tip. Tap became tip. And then I could keep going with this, right? I could change my last sound, and I could change it out for the n. So make your p and n. And I go into 10, and then I can switch out my ah for my I. So as my letter chaining could go for as long as needed for students to solidify kind of that concept and get some practice with blending. Students love it. It's like a game for them as they're switching out letters, and they're really learning essentially how to spell words and read words as they're kind of playing the game for switching out those cards. And then thinking about dictation, because again, if we're teaching it in reading, we're going to teach it in writing. So thinking about practice writing words. We've practiced writing letters as our warm up. Now we're going to practice writing words. And students can tap their fingers. They can kind of tap it out as they're saying the sounds, or we can count it out as we're counting phonemes. Don't underestimate the value of that encoding piece. Often it is what unlocks everything else for students. So let's go ahead and take a look at just an activity for dictation here. And students will use an activity where they're going to listen, repeat the word, count the phonemes, draw lines for each phoneme, and then kind of fill in those phonemes. So on the next slide, we've got kind of what their paper might look like. So they've got a spot, and we say the word for students to read, and this word is going to be tip. What's the word, everyone? Say the sounds in tip. 3 phonemes, draw your 3 blanks. So they draw their 3 blanks on their page, and then say, now write the word tip, 1 letter in each blank, 1 sound for each blank. And they can go through and sound it out, write the letters in their blanks, and then they come up with the word tip on their paper. So go ahead, yep, and then I can check it. So on my paper as the teacher, I'm able to write the word tip on my lined paper, and then students can do their check against mine written on the lined paper. Again, a great time for me to give some handwriting feedback. Your T goes all the way to the top, all the way to the bottom. Your P dips below the line, right? Giving them some feedback there on those lined paper activities for reference. And then the next one is sentence writing. So looking at your guided practice and thinking about a sentence writing. Same kind of routine. Listen to my sentence, tip as a dog. Having students repeat my sentence, counting the words instead of the sounds, drawing their blank for their words, and then going back and writing a word in every blank. So it's taking it from that same routine, but expanding it to that word level instead of the phoneme level for those blanks there. Then your next section here is looking at your your independent practice and your extended practice. So before you get into this, thinking about from a teacher standpoint on your clipboard, the things the teacher has to do before this can happen. We have to explain and model and direct through those I do's and those we do's. We have to think about answering questions and observing and providing feedback as we're leading up to this independent practice, and thinking about confirming or providing that corrective feedback, and then considering next steps. If we notice students making errors, what are we going to do, right? What are our next steps moving forward? So going into this independent practice piece, multiple activities here. Again, this is not an all-inclusive list. But as we're moving into independent practice, we could do activities around T and that letter sound and writing the words with T and then building chains with T and then lots more practice with that. But teachers are going to kind of take a little bit of a less obvious role. I'm still there providing corrective feedback, but they're doing more of the work with less of my guidance. I'm still there for support, but I'm not as heavily involved with all of the students in front of the, in front of the classroom per se. And then thinking about as students are working through some of these activities, not all students might need the same level of scaffolding. So thinking about where can I increase scaffolding where students need it, and where can I take some of that scaffolding back when students don't need that anymore. And that practice doesn't stop on day one. We're going to continue to practice with T as we learn new sounds and as we learn new concepts. This is one activity. I think about it as a paperclip activity, but you could use like little counting bears or chips that you have in your classroom, anything you want to use as a marker. And students are counting the phonemes. They'll move the phonemes down. So for example, if I have a word here, it's cat, they would count the phonemes in cat. They would move their markers down as they're counting the phonemes in cat. So you can go ahead and click for that animation. Then they're writing in the grapheme. So they're going to write in the grapheme for the k, write in the grapheme for the a, write in the grapheme for the t. And then at the end, they're going to write it like it looks like in a word without those boxes. So they're going to kind of recode that word without having it separated in boxes to be the word cat. And that will be your next click there. So you can see that handwritten cat, like it would appear in a book or in text that students would see. And then you have another activity here, extended practice. It's a physical phonics activity. All students at their desk would have whiteboards or lined paper. I would give the word to the students at their desk. Students would write the word. So maybe my word is top, and I'm going to give the word top to students. Students are all going to write the word. I'm going to be circulating, making sure that they're writing top on their boards or on their materials that they have at their desk. And then students have little letter cards. So they become kind of our letter cards, and students with TOP would come up to the front and spell top, and we could check it against what they wrote. And they said, ooh, let's switch this. Let's make our word, instead of top, we're going to make it tap. So they would write it on at their desks, tap, then have my ah switch out for my ah at the front of the room. So just a way to get them kind of moving and participating in the lesson here. Then you've got your regular exposure to connected text, often a piece that's missing in so many classrooms. We do all of this knowledge building for these more simple tasks and then skip over giving students the chance to apply that in text. So we'll look here at how we can do some decoding work with connected text. And really, connected text is just a group of sentences that relate to one another. Most core programs have decodable text as part of their program, but really, how can we get students reading that connected text without so much of our like echo reading? We want them to be doing the decoding work in that decodable text. So one way to kind of warm up for that is doing some review words, having them read from a word list and build some automaticity with words on a word list prior to reading their decodable text, because our word list doesn't really have meaning on its own. But if we get we can get fluent with practicing those words. When we put them in connected text, we're able to read that connected text with more accuracy, fluency, and expression. So here's just an example of that, kind of warming up with a word list with your regular and irregular words, and then how that translates over to your connected text. Using those letter sounds that students have learned to be able to decode that text in that decodable reader type setting for connected text. And then there are a couple here. These next couple of slides will just be some ways to kind of help with scaffolding that. So this is one that's routine with 3 text options, and it's kind of adapted from Susan Hall in the 95% group phonics program. But looking at day 1 and day 2 using the same text, day 3 and day 4 we use the same text, and then day 5 is a different text. And as you look under each of those, the first day of the text really has kind of some words that are highlighted, some sound spelling patterns that students are learning might be highlighted in that day 1 of the read, and day 2 of the read, that highlighting's gone. The scaffolding is removed and students are reading a clean copy of the text. And then day 3 is the same thing. You get a new text. We're highlighting those kind of skill words and those skill focus areas. So maybe in my kindergarten text, all the T's are kind of highlighted and color coded for students that first day of the text. And then we go to the day 2, and that scaffold and that color coding is removed in the clean copy of text. The next example is looking at transfer to text. So thinking about how we can use a text on day 1 and look at those new concept words, underline kind of those heart words or those tricky words. And then as we move across the days in that lesson, students are getting kind of a different exposure, same text, same patterns. So for this one, our kindergarten routine, maybe, they're decodable text with a lot of T words in their decodable text. They're learning the new concept on day 1 and day 2, and then kind of by day 4 and day 5, a lot of that scaffolding is removed. They're not highlighting it in their text anymore. They've got a clean copy of their text, and they're going to move into some quick check, just passage comprehension, who are the character setting, beginning, middle, and end of their decodable text, for example, on that day 5 to get in some of that oral language development there. Then your next slide, looking at our regular words, we'll talk about this one really quickly here, and thinking about, it could go anywhere, but thinking about heart words or irregular words, they go by multiple names. But for this particular routine, this is the heart word routine, and thinking about high frequency words and what they are. So we can go ahead and go to the next slide. This just shows kind of the breakdown of words in English. About 50% of our words in English are decodable based on just the sound spelling patterns that are common in English. 36% of those words in English have kind of maybe one irregular part. So really over 80% of our words are relatively decodable. For those that are trickier, we can look at a heart word routine. So you can go ahead and hit the next slide. And for our heart word routine, we'll walk through what this looks like, but thinking about having paper or whiteboard, some colored pencils available. This is adapted from UFly, which is a great resource for instructional routines. So go ahead and hit the next slide, and we'll walk through this one really quickly. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So looking at your heart word routine, the word is said. What's the word, everyone? Yes, said. Let's count the phonemes. S, e, d. And we would draw our 3 lines, very similar to what we were doing with our decoding and encoding in regular words. What's the first sound in said, everyone? S. What letter spells said? S, everyone. S. So we'll write our S in. Okay, said. The last sound is D. What letter spells D, everyone? D. So we would write our D in our blank. That middle part is that heart part. It's the tricky part. Let's think about the middle sound in said. Everyone, what's the middle sound in said? Eh. Yeah, it sounds like it's an E, but it's really an AI. So we could write our AI in. Everyone write your AI. That's the heart part. And we can draw our little heart over our AI because that's our heart part. That's the one we have to know by heart because it doesn't sound like it's spelled. So a really quick way to just show students where those tricky parts are, what parts can be orthographically mapped, and where is that heart part? Where's that tricky part of the word? Moving into the next piece here is really kind of wrapping up your lesson with some closure and summary. So just making sure we've got to put a bow on it at the end. We summarize the new learning, the new concept, and maybe have some time to preview what's coming up in the next lesson. Looking back here, we've thought about our theoretical frameworks, the National Reading Panel, through our IDA examples of the what, the how, and the why. And then also looking at the instruction, thinking about the how of that explicit instruction routine and that overlay. And then we'll move into some intensification pieces here. So there is a resource. It's the Intensification Toolkit available through NCIL. So I'm going to drop in the chat box the link for this toolkit. Some students we know, even with explicit instruction, are going to need more intensification. So this is a resource to help provide some support with that. Go ahead and hit the next slide there. And then prevention and early intervention. Explicit systematic instruction is a way to really help with that early intervention process and really thinking about that science of reading, the body of research, and what we know about evidence-based practices being a way to prevent some of the reading difficulties students may have. So go ahead and click the next slide. This is NCIL's 4-part intensification framework, really breaks it in again to the what and the how. The what is at the top for reading content and cognitive processing, and the how is instructional design and instructional delivery. A lot of what we've already talked about is incorporated in this infographic, thinking about the concepts that we teach based on the reading panel work and some of that structured literacy language that we were looking at through that explicit instruction lesson plan example is integrated into this as well. And then thinking about data. How does our data wrap around that process? How are we collecting data and using that data really to drive our instructional decisions? So thinking about the data being the teacher, I need that data collection. I need to be collecting that data and paying attention to where those errors are made so that I can alter my instruction to better support the needs of my students. So really thinking about how that data works for me as the teacher, but the instruction and those changes have to happen to support the student. So go ahead and click the next slide. Thinking about intensification, we can intensify across tiers, not just in tier 3. We don't have to wait until tier 3 to do some intensification here. We can intensify by differentiating our reading instruction in tier 1, thinking about our supplemental interventions in tier 2, and then those intensive reading interventions in tier 3. The next slide shows you kind of a graphic illustration of this. It's also available through the NCIL website. But looking at this here, tier 1, your student 1 and student 2, the little blue dots with 1 and 2 are kind of the focus of this graphic, and really thinking about how more intensive means more explicit and direct instruction, more modeling, more practice, more monitoring of feedback, more data collection, more time for students as we move across tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. So as students are participating, these students 1 and 2 are participating in their tier 1 whole group and small group, their tier 2 support for supplemental instruction, and then their intensive instruction, it's getting more explicit, more systematic. Their group is getting smaller. They're getting more opportunities for students to respond across those instructional doses to intensify that instruction for those 2 students in this example. And then this last slide here is just thinking about systematic instruction across tiers. Really thinking about the bolded areas being what is the intensification of that specific example. So I'll just pull out one here in number 3 under that tier 2 column. Students are practicing blending words using continuous blending for a more scaffolded approach. If we go to tier 1 column and look at step 3, students are learning their sound spellings and their practice blending those sound spellings using a sound by sound kind of routine. Now they're going to go to continuous blending for more scaffolding in tier 2, and then that might carry into tier 3, and we might be doing more phonological awareness and phonics and fluency to align with and kind of make that instruction more explicit and more systematic across those doses for students there. So then just some time for reflection here as we're kind of closing out our session together. How does the learning and teaching routines and evidence-based intensification practices relate to your previous knowledge? And then what is an action you have taken or you will take to support the implementation of evidence-based practices when teaching decoding? And I'll get you kind of to hone in on that second one. I'll give you some think time to enter into the chat. What is an action you have taken or will take to support your evidence-based practices through routines that we've talked about today? So I'll give you some think time. Don't hit enter yet, but go ahead and start typing in the chat box. What might be one takeaway from our time together this evening that you could implement in your classroom or in your school building? I'll say enter, and we'll all enter it, and it'll all kind of waterfall into the chat box. So don't hit enter yet. Go ahead and type in your response. What could be a takeaway you can take from today? All right, we'll hit enter in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Go ahead and enter. Nice. Isn't that fun? So then you can kind of scroll up and see kind of some of the takeaways from folks that were in the session with you all as we were kind of sharing space in a shared learning environment. So reading words on a word list to build fluency, thinking about systematic collection of progress monitoring data, having students write and spell the sounds before they warm up for their sentences, using mapping, integrating more core responses. That's one of my favorites. Such a great way to just really quickly boost student participation, engagement, and opportunities for all students to respond, using lined documents and thinking about that integrated handwriting. approach. Great. This is so exciting. That is kind of the last slide. We do have a survey we would love for you to fill out as we're kind of wrapping up. I do see we have some questions in the chat box, so I'm going to kind of scroll up and I'll start kind of working on answering some of those as I can. And I know that our Reading League folks have some things that they want to share with you as we kind of wrap up things this evening too. But please take some time, fill out the survey. There's a QR code here on the screen. I just dropped the link in the chat box too. So you're able to go in kind of either way. You can either scan the QR code or the link. And I'm going to go ahead and scroll back up, start looking at some of those questions as I turn it back over to our lovely hosts for this evening. So thank you all for being here. Jacqueline, you're on mute.
Thank you. So why join us? To be a member of a community that is dedicated to ensuring literacy for all in the state of Virginia and beyond. We are so excited about our member benefits, which include but are not limited to access to wonderful reading, research, and evidence-based instructional practices, resources through webinars such as these by our dedicated partners of literacy, networking opportunities. Membership this year is free, so we're excited about offering our membership free for this year. We have literacy partners. We partner with the Reading League National as well as Virginia-based partners like Virginia Joint Coalition for Learning Disabilities and Literacy. To date, our events and resources have included collaborations with TTAC, VLP, and VDOE. Become an ambassador. Woohoo! The Reading League Virginia needs ambassadors to utilize your professional and social networks to share information about events, the mission, and how to join our growing league. If this piques your interest, scan the QR code or the link has been placed in the chat. Complete the form to learn more and attend an upcoming information session. Now, have you started your holiday shopping? Shop the Reading League Virginia store for the latest apparel and merchandise. Hoodies are sold in gray, blue, and gold, just in time for the fall weather. Jessica, we thank you for sharing your knowledge and your expertise with us this evening. We appreciate all of the wonderful work you do, bridging the gap between research and practice. Special thanks to our members and attendees for taking the time out of your busy schedules to participate in this literacy experience. Thank you so much.
Yes, and for all of us here on the Virginia Reading League Executive Board, we would just like to extend another thanks to Jessica Surles and for all of the staff at the National Center on Improving Literacy for their amazing resources that are all free and open access. So we encourage you to access those resources on their website and to continue learning more. Thanks for joining us.